My past experience in the banking industry has convinced me that the Federal Reserve, along with the population control that is the sexual revolution, and the government schools have brought the church to its knees, and it's not in repentance. May God have mercy on us. In the 1980s, I joined Pastor Tuella and others peacefully blocking doors to abortion clinics, getting arrested for trespass and spending jail time in 5 states. The angry blowback from Christians that we received, combined with what I learned after 7 years of sidewalk counseling and dumpster diving, made it clear back in the 1980s that the sins of the sexual revolution and the resulting murder of preborn human beings was steeped in the church. Pastor Tuella and Reverend Wayne Sedlak here in Milwaukee said for decades that the church has abandoned God's law. That's primary, the problem we have with the kids today. I looked for what else was driving Christian kids into sexual sins. I then studied the parent-approved sexualization of children. I found that classroom sex ed, which I coined classroom sex talk back in the early 90s, was playing the major role. Worse was the phony, Christless abstinence education curriculum initiated in the early 1980s by the federal government to stem the tide of Christian families pulling their children out of public schools in the mid-1970s. But the abstinence curriculums only served as a profitable ruse. The great danger of classroom sex talk is that with no protection from dad and mom, the child then rightly assumes that their parents want them to see all these pictures, hear all these explicit words, watch the videos, and listen to the teacher encourage them to act on it. And it's far worse today. This inherently leads to sin and separation from God for most. Apart from Christ's redemption, bondage to sin ruins their lives. I believe these kids rioting in the streets today can be tracked back to this, but that's for another discussion. Like the devil masquerading as an angel of light, abstinence education presumes to teach children about marital union apart from Christ, apart from his law, apart from their parents, and apart from godly preaching from the pulpit. It worked, and millions of Christian kids stayed in public schools and got thoroughly debauched. It even fooled the once noble Dr. Judith Reisman, who was the one who exposed Kinsey for all of us, but now she's the chairman of the National Abstinence Clearinghouse. James Dobson and others suckered my generation of Christians into believing that if we could only teach abstinence education and get good people on the public school boards, we could turn things around. It was foolish then, and it's far more foolish today. Today, most Christians have no idea the administrative, bureaucratic, and legal firewall that awaits new school board members. Most who get elected either get frustrated and quit after one term in office, or they get rolled into the system. The schools have an entire system of peer pressure, flattery, incentives, coercion, and even legal threats to get new school board members to become one of the team. Art Johnston, twice elected Duluth, Minnesota school board member, reports that the Minnesota School Board Association, or the NSBA's annual convention, has work sessions led by lawyers on how to deal with unruly school board members. Johnston quotes these 3 MSBA officials. Sandy Gunlack says, there is really no such thing as Robert's Rules of Order. Bob Meeks, the former executive director, says, boards should not have public comment time on their agendas. Gail Gilman says, you, the school board members, need to be cheerleaders for the district. You need to show support as a team. Clearly, the MSBA provides little board member training on how to represent the people that elected them. Here's where it gets interesting. Kirk Schneiderwin is the executive director today of the same MSBA, and it serves as the chairman of the National School Board Association's Organization of State Association Executive Directors. If you know anything about nonprofits, the executive directors most often effectively run them. In this prominent capacity, Schneiderwin is an ex officio, non-voting member of the NSBA's board. This is the same national association that recently asked the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI to start investigating parents who show up at school board meetings. It's clear to me that Schneiderwind had a heavy hand in bringing the feds down on parents. A Colorado homeschool mom and critic of public school boards was the first to get a battering ram to her door recently with a morning raid by the FBI. It has begun. As well, the NSBA's website says that yours truly leaves a trail of divided communities with no apparent remorse. My clients just laugh when they hear this comment, knowing it is the school boards that has created this division. Yet I receive phone calls from school board members wanting to resign because the superintendent has all the power and they can affect no real change. And after he was initially elected to the board, Art Johnson quickly learned that their civility code for new school board members is to sit down and shut your mouth. Today, Johnson tells everyone he speaks with to pull their kids out and their grandkids out of the public schools. But I'm thankful for this sophisticated firewall to thwart new school board members. Why? Because nowhere in the Bible does God command the civil authorities to provide for the education of our Christian children. It doesn't exist. And now, as openly anti-intellectual and completely perverse as public education clearly it is my hope that the sooner Christian families hit this firewall, God will open their eyes to see their great error, and they will join the millions abandoning it. For nearly 30 years, I have fought government schools by helping citizens organize to oppose local bond and levy referendums in 9 states. As you heard, I've assisted over 80 referendum committees to stop nearly $4 billion in new debts and property taxes with a 78% success rate. Good campaigns will awaken opponent voters from their apathy. So how does resisting new public school property taxes push back the social destruction produced by them? Let's go back to the beginning of government education in America to find some answers. In 1876, a Virginia professor, R.L. Dabney, warned against setting up property taxpayer-funded so-called free schools. At that time, learning how to read and write and to do your numbers was not considered education. These were the simple tools that everyone who wanted could learn to then go on and get an education. Many were then self-taught, or else neighborhood schools were run by parents, which they paid for. He also made it clear that 19th century Christian opposition to public schools included the fact that God makes people to inherit from their parents various statures, gifts, skills, intellect, and dispositions, and not all children can master classroom study. By 1919, in my state, even Walter Jessup, president of the University of Iowa, was publicly complaining in 1919, quote, "Now America demands we educate the whole. It is a much more difficult problem to teach all children than to teach those who want to learn," end quote. Some children are better equipped by God for hands-on training, apprenticeships, time with a mentor, and cannot master classroom study, let alone to be revolutionized by Marxist groupthink. And this makes them no less in the kingdom of Christ. But for 150 years, the state has claimed that it's their duty to help all children. In naturally failing to achieve this illegitimate goal, public schools have continually excused it, saying it is due to limited resources. Most 19th century Christians understood this, as the idea of one's children being taught by a stranger in the government school was so strongly opposed. This humanist vision was soon followed by compulsory attendance laws. John Taylor Gatto says that they started in Massachusetts in 1852, and 66 years later, Mississippi was the final state to pass theirs. Historians said everywhere there was opposition. In Gary, Indiana, there were school riots in opposition to forced schooling. Now look at where we're at today. Clearly, natural parental affections have been destroyed by government education for most. New school proponent committees that I've battled against are often made up by career women who dump their 6-week-old child off at a daycare and have spent their lives trying to purchase their child's love with toys, clothes, electronics, cars, and now new high schools. It's their guilt. This Virginia professor warned at that time that parents who previously opposed the idea would eventually capitulate and send their children to the Christless schools by rationalizing it. I want to get something for all that tax money they take from me. He was right. The property tax thievery drove Christian children into the hands of the pagan teachers. Many lost their children's souls and their money. This destructive financial incentive Dabney warned of is dominant today, and is one reason 30 years ago I started my consulting business. One of the primary reasons for administrators to build a new schools today is to ensure the ongoing loyalty to their illegitimate existence. Here are some of the political tactics that I bring into these communities. 1, never agree to their stated need. It's either a gross exaggeration or it's often just plain lies. You have to study it, and we know how to do that. 2, take away their do it for the kids moral high ground. Demonstrate how their gluttonous spending sets horrible financial examples for the children. Advocate that the voters need to help the school teach the children how to be better stewards of the money they already have. Here's one good campaign theme. Do what's really best for the children and vote no. Then watch as the school squeals. 3, redefine progress as it applies to the average family in the community. Real progress is to let them keep more of their hard-earned money and invest it in alternative education, local family businesses, pay off debts sooner, etc., but not as even more growth of government programs and buildings. After explaining this, then another good campaign theme is, for real progress, vote no. We flip their progress into the Christian family's progress, not government's progress. 4, honestly, politely, but aggressively destroy the school administrator's credibility, and it's not hard to do, and voters respond very well. 5, make a series of punchy public records requests and hope they refuse to answer them. Then you can attack them with, what are they trying to hide? Why won't they give us these financial records? 6, individuals and businesses with major exposure to property tax increases, if a proposed levy or bond referendum would pass, will often fund your committee's efforts. 7, campaign without local media. They're joined to the hip with government schools. Just ignore them. Getting your kids out and providing them a Christ-centered education is foremost. But far too many homeschool leaders stop right there. Government schools have been on the offense to destroy Christianity since their inception, and yet the weak homeschool leadership in America has only desired to coexist with them. It's time we go on the offense to end public education. Except for the Charles Stodden family of Coles County, Illinois, homeschool families have regularly refused my request to oppose the local public schools. They live in an unhealthy fear of them. But imagine turning loose homeschooled children under their father's supervision running the campaign ground game. A lot of people would get to see homeschool kids for the first time. The blessings would compound in so many ways. Now here's a blueprint for American Christians to go on the offense against public schools. 1, for every child pulled out, 10,000 to 20,000 of state aid gets pulled from the public school. Do the math yourself. Every 100 kids, it's up to $2 million. 2, go to my pro-life page. I have some flyers in back, and download my flyer on the sin of placing Christian children in public schools. Take it to your elders and pastors. The next time parents protest a school board meeting, stand on the public sidewalk and hand it to those going in, including any FBI agents who may be hiding in the bushes. 3, then organize to oppose the government schools' funding, especially where they need voter approval. You can learn much more from my website. At that time of such a referendum, local voters are much more attentive to your message than they would be any other time. They got something in the game. 4, listen up, Wisconsin, but every state this applies to. Then publicly campaign to repeal a particular exemption for teachers and librarians to Wisconsin Statute 944.21. That's your obscenity code. Read the code for yourself, but to summarize the exemption found in paragraph 8B, if you or I said the same filthy things to children on the street that teachers say in classrooms, you'd be arrested and prosecuted. It is time to repeal statutory exemptions that perverted school teachers and librarians have smugly enjoyed with their classroom sex talk and drag queen book readings. Ask the legislators to repeal those exemptions as they're not education. If they refuse, more good parents will see the need to pull their kids out. 5, then start a public campaign to repeal Wisconsin's compulsory attendance law of 1879. Campaign to repeal the law which provides state and local governments the power to levy income taxes and property taxes that fund the public schools. Campaign to repeal the law authorizing the board to enter into employment contracts and to issue debt. In fact, it's time to repeal the law which establishes public school corporations to even exist. Details obviously must be worked out, but the Prussian Unitarian experiment of government schools must be ended to really advance Christ's kingdom in your local community. And by the way, and think about this, at such a time, the massive piles of cash that would be kept in local communities could easily pay for homeschooling and for Christians and other parent societies to set up schools to educate their children, and churches could participate in this windfall and provide charity education to begin to elevate those inner city kids who really want to learn out of their misery taught to them by public schools. Foundations of public education are rotten to the core as they have been illegitimate from the beginning. It's time to go on the offense to see the end of government education, and like the Berlin Wall, God may decide to let it fall a lot faster than we expected. Check out exodusmandate.org and my websites for more information on the pro-life side and on the education side. Thank you.